Hey, this is Ben Solomon, and welcome to this episode of the Techno Leadership Show. In this episode, I am going to be talking about how to mitigate risks as a tech or engineering manager. So, when you get into management and leadership roles, a significant portion of what you do will involve making sure that you mitigate risks, because when something does go wrong, you're the one who has to answer the questions. And the questions are going to come from all parts of the organization, being end users, could be stakeholders, could be executive teams, could be external people, including vendors, contractors. If you've got a managed service partner, then all of that could be part of it. But of course, if you have a managed services partner, there's most likely going to be like a second line of defense where they would have asked you a lot of questions as part of the onboarding, so you have some plan around risks and risk mitigation. But in a lot of organizations, you also have risk plans and disaster recovery plans and things like that that will include some, or if not a lot of aspects of the technology risks and how they can be protected in those documents. So if you're someone who doesn't have a whole lot of experience in this area and your organization has enough money to be able to bring in external consultants, it's always a good idea to have that sort of support to create disaster recovery plans, looking at risks, doing a risk audit, and giving you some form of tangible thing that you can then work with your team to ensure that you're mitigating those risks on a regular basis and ensuring that you maintain some sort of baseline that is acceptable to the organization. At the end of the day, yes, we can all go down the path of being super secure and going to how defense facilities are managed and all that sort of thing. But that just is a step too far for normal organizations. It just makes it so much more harder to get average work done with the budgetary constraints that normal organizations have. So we do have to make a compromise between accessibility as well as security. There is that spectrum that you have to look at to see how much risk can you tolerate to ensure that the person who needs to have access to the information or systems or whatever it might be can have access to it without too much impedance. At the same time, making sure that external parties or parties that shouldn't have access to that particular piece of information don't easily get access to it. So risk mitigation, at least from my standpoint, has always been people risk, systems and process risk, and then technology risk. So the people risk for me is very important because I always look at things from that perspective of, if there is one person in the team who knows a specific platform, let's say there is a specific server that is crucial to the business that's running on Linux, and there's only one member in the whole team who knows how to manage that, maintain that, make changes, do all that sort of thing on that platform. That's a risk, because something can happen to that person, something can happen to the system when the person's on holidays, that person can leave at any point. So that is a risk to the organization. And if it's a critical system, it means if that person leaves, the risk of not being able to fix any issues with that particular system could cost tens of thousands of dollars for the business. So the way you look at it from that perspective is, okay, do you deal with that risk by having training for everyone so that everyone in the team knows enough to be able to work on that system, to do what's required to ensure that you can maintain operational capacity of that system. The second part of that would be around processes. So which would be having documentation, ensuring every aspect of it is documented, from as-built document as well as documents around how to troubleshoot it, how to fix it, what to do to get into the system, and what to look for, what sort of support the system has, all of that being documented. And then looking at it from the perspective of, okay, do we have to have that particular technology, or is there a substitute that everyone can easily utilize that's more serviceable and more accessible and would protect the business in the longer term? So let's say, for example, the Linux system was built in-house so that you could keep costs down at a certain point of the business. Now you've come to a point in the business where you can afford to spend $5, $10, $20,000 to replace the system with something that is more manageable, easy to use, and more people have an understanding of. From a risk mitigation perspective, you're potentially saving the business tens, if not hundreds of thousands of dollars by putting in this $10,000 or $15,000 or $20,000 system that is more accessible for the general public, and it's easier to troubleshoot because it's a platform that everyone understands, etc. That's just a basic, simple thing about people. And let's say that you've got one help desk person. That is a risk as well, because that means, let's say the help desk person is on leave, is unwell, whatever it might be. One of your senior technical staff is going to have to, on that particular day, or the role would have to be shared between multiple people, including the technology manager in cases, on those days or that particular day, to ensure that the function is done, because that is a fairly important function, being the front face of the technology department. But what is the risk of that? When you're losing senior resources to help desk, you're losing their ability to get big projects done, which again threatens project completion, all those sort of things. So that's also a risk. So people risk, you look at it from the perspective of, if a person in the team leaves, is unwell, whatever it might be, how is it going to affect the business? And then work your way backwards from there. What are the strategies that you can put into place? Good documentation always helps. Cross-training is a excellent thing, something that has to be done so that everyone in the team is aware of how to operate the system and at least do basic things in the system. Third line might be having a managed system. So what I try to do in my various management and executive leadership positions is to ensure that we had full managed services contract for firewalls and for some network equipment, for some infrastructure equipment, which meant we could pick up the phone, call our firewall system provider and say, look, I need to make these changes. Can you make sure that it happens? And they have an SLA of 2 hours or 4 hours or whatever it might be, or if you are on a gold standard sort of thing, it's 60 minutes, whatever your SLA agreements are, which was very helpful for us, because when we had our network engineer who managed the firewall on leave for any reason, I could just pick up the phone and go, look, yes, I know how to do it, but I don't spend a lot of my time in there, so I'd rather have someone who's an expert do this, and I put a ticket in, they get the job done, it's all covered. Similar thing when we did infrastructure, we had a service level plan as part of the infrastructure purchasing that included monitoring and some parts of maintenance from Dell and Nutanix, which meant they ensured the firmware was always kept up to date. They ensured if there was any heartbeat missing, i.e. one of the servers was down for a period of time or whatever it might be, they would get in touch with us and see if they can help us with the troubleshooting. It was all part of that package that was there. So these sort of things help with personnel risks. And then you have system risks. So system and processes are, things that you have in your business, but a lot of the systems and processes tend to not be documented. So if the person owning the system and process, for example, as a tech manager, in my head, I knew how loaning devices worked, how what forms we had to get filled for certain authorizations. All of these things were in my head. And for a long time, I wanted to make sure that it was all documented. And I had then slowly started documenting it as part of my process of going, look, I've got to have all this out. Because I knew at one point I'll be moving out of that organization, going into, because I was aiming to go into executive leadership. So I started that process. But even though I had constantly been working on it, when I finally did leave, it took me a while to transfer everything that I did on a day-to-day basis and how I dealt with vendors, how I dealt with different things into process and systems, and do videos, complete my documentation processes and all that sort of thing, and have that in place. But having these sort of documentation, having process diagrams and all that in place means anyone in the organization who has an understanding of the systems and has access to the systems can look at it and make decisions without having to depend on one person. So that alleviates, the person risk as well as a system's collapsing or process collapsing risk. So you have consistency. Anyone who deals with you, with your team, knows that processes are consistent. Ticket comes in, person A, who's the help desk person, might have a look at it, work on it for a little bit, and then escalate it. There's all these processes in place, and if it's all documented, when you do training of new staff, it comes in handy. When you as the manager are not there, they can follow those processes because it's all documented. So those sort of things are part of that risk mitigation for systems and processes. And then you have the technology. So you might have backups. So do you have air-gapped backups, which means completely disconnected from networks? So in case of ransomware or hacking, no one can touch that. Do you have that? That's a consideration as part of the risk mitigation. And the thing is, you might say, look, it's quote unquote not worth the effort. But in a real world scenario, if someone hacks your systems and deletes everything, or you have a ransomware attack and all your data is held to ransom, how much is it going to affect your business? Is it going to be worth tens of thousands? Is it going to be hundreds of thousands? Or is it going to be millions of dollars worth of data being held hostage? Got to think about that. So if you have air-gapped backups that can't be touched, you can recover from that pretty easily. So that's one part of your mitigation plan. But then the other side of the mitigation plan is also having time and resource allocation, i.e. staff time, to be able to do test restores every so often to make sure that your backups are working fine, and then you can actually recover from those backups. Because I've heard so many horror stories of people spending, or organizations spending, tens of thousands of dollars for top-of-the-line backup solutions, but they've never done restore testing, which means where they just depend on log files saying it's backups completed. Can you restore from backup? Who knows? And then disaster strikes, and they sit there going, "Oh, we can't restore from all these backups. We spend tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of dollars putting all this infrastructure in and having all these systems doing backups, but nothing's working." So which is where we had a quarterly cycle of doing full disaster recovery backup changeovers, but we also had a weekly and some systems even daily restore testing. Even though we were resource constrained, I made sure that the engineer in charge of that had space and time to be able to do that, because I understood how critical that was. Because that's an expectation that I had set with the business, with the executive teams, that we will be able to recover in a certain period of time, which meant I needed to make sure all these things were recoverable within that time frame. So that's the thing. So that's one of the technology things. Then you might have technology things around. If you have services like DHCP or DNS running off one server, I've seen that happen. And that server is like your oldest box in the server room. It's a big risk. You never know when that's going to die. And if it dies, the whole organization is gone ski. So what do you do in those sort of circumstances? There's things like clustered servers, failover clustering. There's things like hyperconverged infrastructure, where you'd have multiple servers that work as a single unit. And then you have the option of having multiple domain controllers with DHCP and DNS and everything operating on it, so that if one fails, the other one's there to take over, or there's a couple more to take over. Yes, it's a licensing cost, it's a maintenance cost, it's all of these things, but what is the cost to the business if you have a failure? You have to always think about catastrophic failure. What will happen if that one system fails? And it means everyone as a sitting duck can't do anything to work. Yes, you can change over switches to give DHCP for the day or whatever till you fix it. There's all these hacks that you can go into, but the thing is, realistic cost to the business, the cost versus benefit, is the benefit's a lot higher having a failover system that takes over without you having to intervene directly. And then it gives you time to be able to fix the issue without affecting the working of the organization. So that's the three-layer thing that I look at. I'm sure different people have different ways to look at it. And then there is governance frameworks that use. So usually the board of a company has certain governance requirements that they put in place to ensure that the organization's continuity and its normal functioning and security and everything is meeting certain requirements. So everything that governs the systems, the people, the processes and technology will all come from this overarching governance that's in place, and the risk appetite that is dictated by these governance frameworks that's in place above there. So hopefully that helps you out around risk mitigation, how to think about it. And look, there's a whole area of risk mitigation and risk management in IT, but then there's risk management overall as well. And I would advise anyone who goes into technology management and then looking at going into like CIO, director level roles, to go through some sort of program to get a good grasp of this, and to just get frameworks in your mind to think about risks in different ways and putting in mitigation strategies to reduce the effect of those risks. You can't completely eliminate risks. It's a fact of business, but certain risks deserve more attention and deserve more investment for the mitigation than others. And to know which ones are going to affect the business at a much larger scale and has a higher potential for occurring helps you then figure out the best way forward. So I wish you all the best in your journey as a tech professional, manager, and leader. If you like this episode, please hit the like button. If you haven't subscribed yet, please hit the subscribe button, and so that you are notified of future episodes as they are released. Take care, and I look forward to talking to you in a future episode.